So part one, I was focused on growing our container of who we think we are. I was focused on that we are always more than whoever we can define ourselves as. Always. And that if we make that the most important thing we are looking at, life becomes miraculous. This week, my focus is on sovereignty. And sovereignty is an interesting word because it comes up in many different ways. As I have said many times, the ego does not make a great master, but makes a wonderful servant. That is our soul's intention, our higher self, that really allows us to blossom, to become more than, to become who we have come here to be. But that when we're focused on our egos, when we let our egos lead, that's when we get into struggle, that's when we get into fighting to make things happen, that's when life starts feeling really hard. And one of the ways in which I got through almost dying was by staying very focused on who I was being instead of what outcome I wanted. As I said last week, not once did I pray to live and be healthy and all that kind of stuff. Instead, I stayed very, very focused on the infinite nature that I am. Very focused on that. Knowing that in each cell of my body, health already exists, and it was just my job to remember that infinite nature. That's where I held my consciousness. And that's where sovereignty lies. That's when we are in charge of our lives and who we are, not the circumstances. Sovereignty is not about being in charge of the circumstances. It is about being in charge of ourselves and making a stand around that for ourselves that then sometimes plays out in terms of how we interact with others. So one thing I forgot to tell you last week that was also another complication in the midst of Monday when they were telling me how close I was to dying was that they had me on 2 different blood pressure medications because my blood pressure was so low that they were doing everything in their power to make sure I had a blood pressure. So that was going on Monday night, as well as dealing with the fact that I was 5 percentage points away from dead in terms of my blood oxygen levels. So Tuesday morning comes, and the guy, the lead doctor, the head infectious disease guy in your country, comes walking into my room, all smiles that I'm still alive because nobody expected that, and said that not only had I moved to a place of where I was now breathing where I wasn't close to the line of dying. They had me at 70% oxygen. I was taking in, my blood oxygen levels was between 85 and 90, which is not great, but not dead. And they took me off one of the blood pressure medications because my blood pressure was starting to return. So things were really looking up. As I had mentioned last week, I had this catheter in that was giving me extraordinary pain. And so I looked at the doctor and I said, it's time to remove the catheter. And he said, no. And I reminded him that my right was to make the final decision around my care. He then went on around the fiduciary responsibilities he had and then used one of my favorite words in the English language. He said the word negotiate. So I perked up because I love that word. And I love to negotiate, always have. And so I said, okay, what's it going to take to get this catheter out? And then he went into this whole thing about their biggest concern was a blockage. Since my kidneys had gone into renal failure, they were very concerned that if they pulled out the catheter, that there would be a blockage and that they'd have to go back in and with a scope and this and that and the other thing. And I said, well, if you're doing all these heavy-duty procedures on me, I'd be under anesthetic. Isn't that right? And he said, yes. And I said, deal. Now, also going on at that time is my higher self, my soul's intention being very clear with me, there was no blockage. But, I'm also playing the other side and going, just in case there is, let me make sure I have a good deal here that I can live with if this thing goes awry. And so we come to this agreement. He's a little shook up because he's obviously not used to somebody when he says this is how it's going to be, saying to him, well, actually, that's not how it's going to be. And so he goes, he leaves, and the nurses are now a little shook up, and everybody is a little like something's gone on here that they're not used to, which is sovereignty, which is me being responsible for myself. And I'm very clear about that. And when we are clear about that, we stand in a place, irregardless of how it's playing out here, of knowing that it's our highest and best self that's in charge. If our ego is in charge, well, then it's not sovereignty. Then we're just looking for control, and then we're just all over the place. But when he said that word negotiate, I was right there with him, and I was willing to agree to pretty much anything to get this catheter out. So about 1 o'clock that afternoon, a resident shows up, walks me through the agreement again, because they're going to do an ultrasound as soon as they pull it out and after the first time I pass water to see if there's a blockage. So the nurse comes in, 1 o'clock, they pull out the catheter to my utter relief. And shortly thereafter, I pass some water, they do the ultrasound test, and sure enough, no blockage. They said that there was, it needed to be less than 100 milliliters in my bladder, and in fact, it was completely empty. There was no blockage. So this is now Tuesday afternoon. I'm still doing my breathing exercises. They still have me on a lot of different medications to move things along. By Tuesday evening, they had reduced the oxygen level to 60%. My blood oxygen level was still holding at 85 to 90. And they took me off the second blood pressure medication because my blood pressure was now holding steady. And they were shocked. They did not expect this type of bounce back. So, Wednesday morning comes around, and they'd taken me off everything except the antibiotic, which I was supposed to be on for 7 days. Doctor comes in Wednesday morning, says, we're going to move you up to the ward. You don't need to be here anymore in ICU. And then he lied to me, which I found really fast. And I knew he lied when he did it. I saw it in his face. I saw it when he said to me, when we move you upstairs, they had a shunt in me here where they were using as an IV in my vein. They had another shunt here that was in my artery. And they were going to remove those two things. And he didn't want to tell me that I was going to need to get stuck again when I got upstairs because I have veins that tend to collapse. And so he lied and said, when you're upstairs, you get to be on oral medication. You don't have to do IVs anymore. And he swallowed when he said it, and he looked away. I mean, it was just so clear that he was lying to me. And I let it go. I did that. I let it go, knowing fair well that he was lying. And yet, when they moved me up to the ward, and they told me they needed to put the IV back in, I wound up using my outside voice. For 15 minutes, I bellowed about how the doctor said I could be up here on oral medication, knowing darn well that that wasn't the case. Upset quite a few people. Finally got a hold of myself. Enough to stew for the next hour before I finally, truly got a hold of myself. And I wanted you to know about this particular outburst for several reasons. One is it may be possible that because I had this incredible face of God moment, that you might think that somehow I'm enlightened now. And I wanted you to know that I'm still, just like you guys, walking along, still dealing with the, everyday stuff, and still doing my work, just like you. We're on the same thing here, so please at no point put me up on a pedestal. I don't even like heights all that much. Secondly, I wanted to tell you about this because this is how it goes. When we are transforming, and I am transformed by this, that doesn't mean there aren't setbacks. That doesn't mean there aren't times when we go back to how we were, even though we're now this new person. And it's really important that we don't beat ourselves up for this, because the way it goes is we lose our practice, we find our practice. We lose our practice, we find our practice. We lose our practice, we find our practice. This is the work. The question is like Dr. Barbara Waterhouse used to say all the time, it's not what you do first, it's what you do second. So now I knew I had a lot of amends and apologies to make. And went about doing that. Went about going and speaking to telling everybody I'm sorry, what can I do to make amends around this? Asked I said I was ready for the new IV. This young nurse comes in who had been there when I was bellowing, and she's shaking. The woman who is about to stick me, hand is shaking. So I am just showering her with love, telling her how much I believe in her, doing everything in my power to calm this woman down. I'm truly feeling bad about having, had that upset with her. And so, finally, and showed her, they knew I had mentioned about my collapsing veins, but I pointed to where most people, have success. And so she went over there, and I'm just looking straight at her and said, I believe in you. I know you got this. And the look of fear and consternation on her face was unbelievable as she stuck that needle in and hit it on the first try. And then all of a sudden, her face just opened. The huge smile on her face. She was so happy with herself as she finished, wrapping it up and getting it ready for the IV. And then I hear her go outside and tell her friends about how happy it was and how it worked and all this stuff, right? Which to my relief, because the next lady comes in, the next nurse comes in, and she's all smiles now. And because her friend was so happy about her interaction with me. So I'm off to a good start now. And so she comes in, and they set it up. Since the only thing I needed was through IV, was the antibiotic, which took about a half hour to 45 minutes, they set it up where they'd hook me up and then they'd unhook me. So I had full freedom to move around as I wanted, which was great because at the Royal Alexander, they got this atrium, they got this garden. Now, the thing about it is, which is really, I'm still on oxygen, right? The oxygen's at 40%, but I'm still on oxygen. I was still able to bellow on oxygen. And so, but now I'm going out and I spoke to the charge nurse and I spoke to the other, everybody I interacted with, I apologized to, and asked, what I can do to make amends and that I'm really, going to work with them in any way they need, and I'm making friends. And this is really working out. And I'm starting to walk around a little bit. They set me up with a walker because I didn't want to have to carry the tank, so that I could walk around with with the oxygen. And I went down to the atrium. Ash was there, and we'd sit down there. We'd go sit out in the garden, and I had the window. It was a double room, and I had the window. And Ash went out and did some shopping, and so because they said also I could eat anything I wanted, and so instead of hospital food, Ash was bringing me whatever, and so I was getting to eat real well, and my health was coming back really fast at this point, really fast. And so on Thursday, the respirator lady comes back and goes, let's run some tests. And so she takes me off oxygen and starts walking me around the hospital and having me talk the entire time I'm walking, takes me down and upstairs and goes, you don't need oxygen anymore. And that's Thursday. From Saturday, from Monday, when they said I was 5 percentage points away from dead, now they're saying you don't need oxygen anymore. I was as surprised as they were. But my health is just bouncing back, and I'm keeping my focus. Now that I'm back, I'm just keeping my focus on who am I being? Who am I being? That infinite nature. Who am I being? That's all I'm looking at, and I'm watching my health just pop. Friday, 3 of my siblings show up. From different parts of the country, they come walking in together. It was incredible. And they had two priorities. The first was to give Ash a break. She'd been doing everything, all week long. This was her chance. Now they were going to take care of everything. And the second was to make sure I wasn't dead. We sat up in the garden. The first time I saw him, we sat up in the garden. I cried when I saw him. And of course, walked him through, what had occurred and all that stuff. And they're looking at me like, how could that have been on Monday and here on Friday, you sitting here like this? How is that even possible? And I'm here to tell you that sovereignty, that opening up to that infinite nature of who we are, growing ourselves, this is what does it. This is what creates miracles. This is just another miracle. And so my siblings are there, and the highlight of the visit, I gotta backtrack. I forgot something that was really important in this story. Well, just from the standpoint of sovereignty and dignity is important. One of the things that happened when they pulled out the catheter was one of the first things I noticed is I had no control over my bodily functions. None. And so they put me in a diaper. And I had to grow myself around that. And as I grew myself around this, I saw something incredibly important for me, which was my dignity, my self-respect, my sense of self had nothing to do with circumstance, had nothing to do with what was going on with my body. I was laughing so hard. I thought, oh my God, I thought this would be the worst thing that ever happened to me. You know, you hear about the pens, and I was thinking, and here I am in a diaper, and I'm thinking to myself, so what? I don't have the pain of that catheter anymore. That was way more important. And I felt that. I felt this sense of dignity through what I had experienced, through being at that gate, seeing the face of God, being there, and allowed that to really be the infinite nature of who I was as I'm walking around in a diaper. So my siblings show up, and my favorite part of them being there was on Saturday in the afternoon when we had a conversation that I'd been wanting to have with them for 20 years, maybe longer, which was about our traumatic childhood and how it impacted all of us and how we interacted with all of us, because they'd never wanted to talk about it. And all of a sudden, because I almost died, they brought it up and wanted to talk about it. They brought it up. And so we had this incredibly healing discussion about our lives. I mean, I was so moved by their willingness to share and be open around all that. Never would have happened. I shouldn't say that. It might have happened. But this is what had it happen. And so here I was, having gone through all these different levels of miraculousness, thinking to myself, it was worth it. It was totally worth it. Imagine being that close to death's door and saying to yourself, it was worth it. That's the miraculousness of what's possible. All of us go through incredibly difficult times in our lives, about one thing or another. Maybe it isn't death's door, maybe it's your parents' death's door. Maybe it's your kids' death's door. But the miraculousness that comes out of our simply being alive, our simply having the experience and being able to be that deeply with it. I mean, it changed me to where I could now be sitting with my siblings having a discussion that I never knew would actually happen. And my health continued to improve at quite a pace. That by Sunday, I was starting to get control over my bodily functions again. And they sent me home. By Tuesday, I was no longer in a diaper, and I was up walking around, and people were coming over, and I was taking walks with folks. It was amazing. By Wednesday, I knew I could talk last Sunday. And my health just continued to grow. And I never once focused on my health. We have a power within us, each and every one of us, that is so much greater than the circumstances. Dr. Barber used to say, don't tell your God about your big problems. Tell your problems about your big God. We have a power within us that is extraordinary, that is so large that we can only, sometimes can only see it when we get to that kind of edge. I don't need to go to that edge again. I've seen it now. It's now a part of me in a way that it never could have been otherwise. So I am grateful and humbled by all that I have been through. I am so humbled by it. I am here before you now to say that that power is in every one of us. It is up to us to tap into. And the practice, we lose the practice, we find the practice. We lose the practice, we find the practice. That's what we do. And the more we do that, the more foundation it builds, the stronger it gets, the stronger we get within our knowing of infinite nature. Soul's intention. These words that I am using week in and week out, I held to at death's door. And I stand before you now telling you there's nothing more powerful in life. And I am so grateful to each and every one of you for taking this journey with me and for giving me the opportunity to share what I've been through. I know for each and every one of you that in your darkest hour can be your greatest miracle. Thank you. I love you.